the Chris Tucker that we got now is Epstein Island Chris Tucker.
You knew Jeffrey Epstein, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, not Smokey.
We flew
Oh, Lord.
Bill Clinton and a lot of different Hey, we was going to Africa to save lives.
If I didn't know no better, I'd tell you he's the greatest.
Because of the podcast that came out that basically shook the internet. I mean, it's just everywhere. People that he talked about are just replying to him to get hits, and it just blew up Shannon Sharp, the guy who did the podcast. They're comparing him to Joe Rogan. Just like a lot of residual stuff came from this podcast. How much of it were you able to check out? Because it's just like our podcast. It's a long one.
Yeah, well, I watched about 90 minutes of it, so there's still like an hour more, I think. So I haven't seen the whole thing, but I was working on it right up until the last minute here. So I got a sense of it for sure. I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't heard anything until you mentioned it. I guess I'm just stuck in my own world here, working on my own things, and was completely unaware of this. So it's been interesting for sure.
Yeah, I have 3 Twitter accounts. The one we share for the podcast, the one with my name on it, and the one that I use just to peruse the internet. So I can see where you're coming from, because the personal internet one that I use just to peruse the internet, news and sports and things like that, that is just littered with Katt Williams. But the other 2 that are just movie based hardly have any mention of it at all. So I see where you're
coming from. Yeah, and I can't say that I was really very familiar with him either. I know he's been in some things, and I think I've seen him in some things, but I couldn't have told you who he was or his name or anything. So again, it's interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, because you think about the podcast, it was like almost 3 hours, or over an hour and a half, maybe 2 and 4 hours and 45 minutes. It's a really long podcast. It has almost 50 million views. Not to mention all the little clips that have a couple million views each. And that doesn't count all the Twitter clips and all the recycled clips that people are just posting on their own pages and stuff like that. All the hacked clips and things like that. So you just compare that to like our podcasts. I'm happy when a video gets 100 hits, it's like, yes, successful video, 100 hits,
For sure.
or 1,000 hits. I'm like, wow, what did we do right in this video? We got 1,000 hits,
Yeah.
So that just shows
you
your perspective of like how much it took off.
It does. It really does. It's a whole other category there.
Yeah. So we did it to watch this movie because I guess this was a movie that blew him up. And I guess there was a lot of beef with him and the other actor that played the Santa Claus character on like who was supposed to play it. I thought that both characters fit fine. I think Ricky Smiley, there's a lot of talk about emasculating Black men by putting them in dresses. I do think there's a lot to that. I don't find men in drag that funny. I know some of the like funnier comedies ever, like Some Like It Hot, Tootsie, Mrs. Doubtfire. I'm sure there's like a million more. And the TV show that blew up Tom Hanks, Bosom Buddies. There's just a lot of history of like men in drag. But I do agree with Katt in that I do think putting Black men in drag is a way of emasculating them. Because a Black man can be intimidating to an audience, a general audience. And then seeing him in drag kind of like, it's kind of like a relief. It's like, ooh, like, oh, but I do get that, like the Step and Fetch, the Manton Moreland type thing, where it's just like, all right, here we're going to go cooning around and being stupid. We're not going to be masculine. We're not going to be the heroes. We're just going to be the mammies and stuff like that, And it's generally like oversized, fat Black women that they're playing. Which is I think Medea is the one that's like he's like a billionaire from that. What's his name again that plays Medea? Medea. You're like, who's Medea?
I know the Greek tragedy, Medea.
Oh God. No.
Um,
Medea, actor. Let me see. Tyler Perry.
okay, yeah.
You never heard of Tyler Perry? You lucky bastard.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's basically a billionaire from just, doing like, dressing up like a fat black woman and just saying stupid black saying, "Well, sugar, come here, honey." Just stereotypical, like, coonish or like, old, racist black humor. It's just like,
Yeah,
and black people love it, but it's more so American black people that love it, which is why I never got into that culture because I'm either offended by stuff like that or I just don't find it funny. Like
yeah,
it just like seeing someone in drag is just not inherently funny to me, or just
no,
hearing like old sayings and cliches and like "you go girl," "oh you crazy," like stuff like that is just, and that's how like a lot of these guys make their money. That's how he became a billionaire. And I guess the guy he had beef with is Ricky Smiley. He's the guy that plays the Santa Claus character, and
yeah,
he's another one that does a lot of Christian stuff and dresses up in drag and does that. So I purposely mentioned those movies, one because I think they're some of the most successful movies and TV show that dealt with drag, aside from Medea, but they're all white men. So it's not
mhm,
just a black thing. But for me, I do find it specifically with black men, it's emasculating. And as a whole, leaving race out of it, I just don't find that type of humor funny in any way. What are your thoughts? I'm sorry, what are
yeah.
your thoughts, Angus?
Well, Sean, yeah, I don't really find men in drag to be particularly funny. For me, I think it's the impression I've gotten is it's something that was kind of big going back to the World War II era, where you see it's some musicals and some movies, you'll see soldiers putting on sketches, and of course, there's no women; they're all men. So the men will dress in drag and play the women, and people found this hilarious, and it may have come out of that sort of necessity. We don't have women, so we're going to have men in drag. I don't know, but that may have worked for people in the 40s or 50s, but yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't seem funny to me anymore. It doesn't mean anything. And I think you also see cases where men will be in drag, and I think when, if it was in the 50s or the 40s, people didn't even realize that they were men. They were so convinced that these are women. But when you look at them now, they're so obviously men because we're used to the idea that men do this. Some men do wear drag, and so it's not unheard of. But I think back in the day, just putting on a dress and putting on some lipstick, people would just say, "Oh, that's a woman." They just wouldn't. It wouldn't occur to them that a man would do that, and so it hasn't aged well in that way either, where it's not really super convincing in a lot of those old movies. Even like Some Like It Hot, which I think is a great movie. They're not really convincing as women to me the way that they were, I think, when the movie was made. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, I never liked Some Like It Hot, honestly. And that was a movie I saw as a kid. So there was no like, I didn't think about the race thing. I didn't think about like it being offensive. Like none of the politics of it ever got to me. I just never found it funny because I think the joke is supposed to be, oh, there goes a man in a dress. But if
Mhm.
that joke isn't funny, then where else is the humor? Like, what are they doing that's actually funny aside from being in a dress? I never thought Tony Curtis was very funny. Um, who's it? Who's the other guy?
Jack Lemmon.
Jack Lemmon. He's a funny comedian in the right circumstance. But Tony Curtis was never an actor that did it for me. Some of his more serious roles, The Sweet Smell of Success, stuff like that, I liked him in. But Marilyn Monroe, I thought she was okay in there, but she seemed like that was kind of like her drugged out days. I don't know if she was all like mentally there for a lot of her scenes. I know it's an all-time classic, but honestly, I was never a fan of it. And
Yeah,
Tootsie,
well,
I never found funny. What about Tootsie? Did you like that?
I did like it when it first came out. I thought it was funny. I enjoyed it. Honestly, haven't watched it in, I don't know, 20 years or more. So
Mhm.
I'm not sure how it would work for me now. But when I was a kid, I thought it was funny. And
Mhm.
yeah, I liked it.
What about Mrs. Doubtfire?
You know, I'm not sure that I ever saw Mrs. Doubtfire. It just didn't
Mhm.
appeal to me. I just thought, that's dumb. You know, I just didn't care. I didn't want to see that one.
Mhm. But those are three really, really, really like looked at as like all-time great comedies, you
Yeah,
know. And then yeah, like I said, obviously you have the Medea, and then you have Martin Lawrence did Big Mama's House, and you have a
right.
lot of that stuff. Eddie Murphy wore drag a bunch in the
Yeah,
different movies as well. I think he did it for Coming to America and The Nutty Professor.
yeah.
He was women and well, I'm sure Jerry Lewis must have done it, right? In something. He seems like the type that would have done that.
Yeah, I could be wrong. It's been a long time since I saw this, but I remember that movie he made called The Family Jewels, where he played like 12 different characters or something like that. So
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if one of them was a woman, but I can't really
He
remember it.
seems like that type of comedian, that would do something
Yeah,
like that. So
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. I'm just not it's just not for me. I just don't find it inherently funny. So you have to put on the dress and to be funny, not just put on the dress. And the humor is, look, it's a guy in a dress and he's acting like a
mm,
woman. If that's
yeah,
the joke, if that's the end goal of the joke, then I'm not with you. It's like, all right, you're gonna put on the dress. All right, now do a joke in a dress. Then I don't see how the dress is enhancing the joke. So
right. Yeah.
not sure, but yeah, not a big fan of that. Um, but so what did you think of Cat Williams? Did you find him funny at all
You mean in the podcast or in the movie?
in the podcast?
Yeah, well, I mean, at times, he seemed like he was an intelligent guy who had
Mhm.
some good thoughts. He had some opinions. I found myself, because I don't know any of this stuff he's talking about. It's like, is he right about this? Is he telling the truth about? Like, I had no idea, but I gather that he is pretty much talking the truth most of the time there, just from the little reading I've done. So yeah, I mean, he seemed like a good guy who had integrity. He comes off at times as a little crazy because he's just, talking about reading whatever it was, 2,000 books a year when he was a kid and that kind of thing. Like, can that be real? Is that like John Holmes or, somebody saying they slept with 14,000 women? It's like, is that a real number?
Was that
Or is
like
that
Wilt Chamberlain saying he slept with like
yeah, well,
crazy money?
he claimed more than John Holmes, which I found suspect because John Holmes, at least it was his job to sleep with women, right?
Mhm.
He was a porn star, so there is some possibility there. But if it's just your spare time, I don't know. That's a lot of
Mhm.
women.
Wilt Chamberlain said 20,000 women he slept with.
Wow, and I think it was about 14 that John Holmes said, if
Mhm.
I remember. But
Mhm. Wilt Chamberlain
yeah,
also said he scored 100 points in the game. So
oh
and there's
yes,
no footage to back it up. So I don't think there's footage to back up the 20,000 women either. Unlike John Holmes, who would have some
yeah,
footage to
but
back his claim up.
there is some footage, and what I do wonder is when he says that, is he counting women who are absolutely different from each other, or is he counting, oh, I made all these movies and there'd be the same 10 women that are appearing in a lot of
Mhm.
these movies, so he counts each one as a separate encounter, but it really needs to be a separate woman to say I slept with 14,000 women.
Yeah,
So
it's not like I had sex 14,000 times.
yeah,
There were 14,000 different women each time.
yeah, exactly,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
So I don't know, but yeah, so I found it interesting, and I'll probably finish watching it because yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there.
So I wasn't probably as lost as you with the references, but a lot of the references did lose me as well. And I did find myself doing research after I watched it. But even without the research, what I found interesting is he's such a good storyteller. Who
Mhm.
knows how much of it? It seems he seems like a genuine and a nice guy, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of people that back him up. But let's take right or wrong or truth or lies out of it. What I found interesting is he's a great storyteller and he's funny and he's charismatic. What I found when I saw clips of people replying is they were so serious and they were like so stressed out and they were not funny on any level. I'm like, you guys are comedians? Like, at least be funny. Like, to me, that's the most stark difference I saw. When he's saying this, he's being hilarious, he's being funny, he's being charming, he's being smooth, and they're like why would he say this? Like, he's ruining my life, and like I never did that, and here's this proof. And they're just like so stressed out and so serious. And like you look at who they are, and the first thing you see is comedian. I'm like, that guy's not a comedian. Like, there was nothing funny about that. So I think that was the most interesting thing about this whole thing is like, not just did he call them out, but they didn't even like clap back in a way that was entertaining. They were like, here's my comeback, and it's going to be super serious and boring. And like, I need to know the details of everything. I don't need to know the details based on what he said. He told the story well. Like, even if I didn't know what's going on, I'm like, all right, I hear what you have to say. Let me hear what you have to say. It's like, it's just like, so I don't know. That to me, that was my biggest takeaway from the whole thing. Because, like I said, I was lost like you, not as lost because I kind of knew who some of these people were. But yeah, that was my main takeaway from the whole thing. It's just that like he seems to be a lot funnier than these other people, at least based on their
Yeah.
responses.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think from what I could gather, he would say that a lot of these comedians, I mean, I don't know which ones were responding, but a lot of them are, in his opinion, not really good comedians, or they're just not even comedians. They're kind of phonies in some way, like they don't write their own material or whatever. They've been using the same material for 20 years. I kind of appreciated what he had to say about, he thought that it was his job to sort of write new material all the time, and try to write good material. And I can sort of identify with that too. From my own experience, I always believe in trying to come up with new stuff and fresh stuff and not just repeat the same stuff. And I don't believe in, stealing things from other people and all that stuff. So, a lot of what he was saying really resonated with me. Um, and again, I don't know a lot of these other comedians, so I can't really say what they're like, if they're any good or not. But the implication being that they don't have the work ethic maybe that he does. And yeah, I don't know. That did resonate with me.
Yeah, I think a big thing in I guess in the comedian culture is not stealing jokes, being able to do stand up, and being able to have fresh material. You have to be able to write, constantly have fresh material, go on the road, do stand up, don't steal jokes. Those are like the certain commandments that you have as a comedian to get respect within that culture. Because even someone like Jerry Seinfeld, one of the most successful comedians ever, because of that show, after he did the show, he still went out and did stand up because like
Hmm.
he's like, that's part of being a comedian, tightening up your jokes, freshening up your act, trying new acts everywhere. Even Dave Chappelle, to me, one of the
Hmm.
funniest comedians ever. Like after he
Hmm.
had that successful TV show, had his little mental breakdown, went to Africa, didn't sign the big contract, came back. He started doing the little clubs, and eventually, now he has like a big Netflix every year or a couple of years. He's like a big show on Netflix, earning like tens of millions of dollars doing stand up. So I think that's a big part in that culture is, are you a writer or are you just someone just like reading cue cards?
Hmm.
Like, is that really being a comedian? Is like you sound funny reading someone else's lines? Are you actually like in the trenches, doing this type of stuff?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And you know, he reminded me of people I've known who worked in radio and stuff like that, and they would always have tons of stories about the other radio personalities and how they were, you know, drug addicts or whatever. There was a lot of sort of negative stories, and um, it's just interesting to get that kind of. It's like he's peeling back the curtain and letting us see or hear about a lot of what goes on, you know, in terms of people who may not have talent and, you know, couldn't read the cue cards or whatever, you know, they're not what you think, according to him anyway. um, so yeah, I think that's part of what makes it so fascinating, is just that kind of that look into that world that is usually sort of private. We don't usually get to know what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and then after the podcast, for the last week that the podcast has been out, you have people posting videos of like, backing up what he's saying because there's footage there. He wasn't wrong. You'd see
Yeah.
him do a joke, and then months or years later, you see another comedian doing the same joke with slight variations. It's like, wait a minute, that's his joke. He's right. Like you're just
Yeah.
retweaking his same joke. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of the proof is right there as well. So, there's a lot of truth to what he says. Now, this doesn't really fit into what we normally do. This isn't us searching the globe for one of the greatest films ever made, which is kind of like our thing. We do
Yeah.
take variations sometimes for different reasons. We went with The Descent because we wanted a horror movie. We went with The Black Phone because we wanted a new movie. So now we're going with this because we wanted to jump on this Cat Williams stuff and see how it goes. So I almost got a panic attack because I was like, oh shit, did I pick the wrong movie? Because I've never seen these movies before. All I know is Friday's the original one, and he was in a sequel. And I
Yeah.
had already sent you a copy of it, and I made you watch it. And then I'm sitting down to watch it. I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't next Friday. This is Friday after next. This is a movie. There's a movie. This is a third movie. I'm like, wait a
Yes.
minute. Is he in this movie? Did I pick the wrong movie? So I almost had a panic attack because I didn't realize. I thought he was in the second movie, but this is the third movie. And thank God he was in the third movie because I just got confused by the titles. So
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I haven't seen any of them prior to this either. So the third movie is the first movie that I am watching in this series. So I'm not sure what subtleties I might be missing, things that were set up in the first or the second movie. I'm not sure.
this doesn't
But
seem like a movie that's big on subtleties.
maybe not, but yeah, it'll be interesting to maybe see one day what the first two were like and see how this one fits in. But I guess with no further ado, I will launch into Friday After Next. We start with a Christmas song, and then we see Christmas decor on a house, including a sleigh. A man in a Santa suit appears in front of the house, and instead of a beard, he's wearing a mask. He takes a swig from a bottle in a paper bag. So we kind of know this is no ordinary Santa Claus. And as he staggers toward the Shady Palms apartments, a title appears that says Friday, 3:37 a.m., Christmas Eve. So right away, we're pretty sure this is a Christmas movie, which is interesting. Santa breaks into a room and he starts stealing gifts from under a tree. And then he steals other things and then food from the refrigerator. Craig wakes up and catches Santa eating a sandwich. There's a big fight, and Santa winds up getting away with a bag of stolen goodies. The narrator basically says something along the lines of, I don't know if I can handle another Friday. So I guess an acknowledgement that this is a sequel. And then he wakes up his cousin, Day Day, and says, we got robbed. I need to call the Popo. And then the credits roll. Any thoughts on this opening sequence?
Yeah, so I thought it was a good way to start off the movie. I thought it was funny. It's ironic Santa Claus is stealing. And I think they established that he stole the rent money, so it already sets up the premise that they're going to spend this Friday getting the rent money back. And I like the animated credits. So I liked it.
Okay, cool. I like the fact that it did establish the whole Christmas atmosphere. And I did wonder how smart they would be to call the police, because we'd seen shots that included certain plants in the house that might be illegal. Um, so we find the cops are in the apartment, and Craig tells them that Santa stole a bunch of stuff, including the rent money, which was hidden inside.
I
a
jumped the
speaker.
gun on the rent money scene.
You did slightly jump the gun there, but that's okay. And the cop winds up finding the plant, which I guess we could call a cannabis plant, perhaps. And he decides, or they decide, to confiscate it. And they give Craig their cards, Officer A. Hole and B. Dix. The landlady shows up and tells them that they better have the rent money or they'll be in trouble. Her son Damon is home, and this seems to panic Craig and Day Day, who have a flashback nightmare about being in prison with him. The landlady tells them that when you spend 14 years in prison, you become fond of little girls like them. Either I get my money or you get your salad tossed, she says. So I guess, we're kind of getting jokes about sexual assault here at this point. They assure her that they are starting their new jobs today and they'll have the money tonight. Next thing we see, they emerge from their place wearing security guard uniforms. On the way out, they run into Damon, who's shirtless and showing his big muscular physique. And since he hasn't seen them in 14 years, he insists on hugging them. But then he puts them both in headlocks and tells them they better pay the rent money tonight or else. They get into their car and leave, passing by the cops, who are sitting in their car smoking weed. Any thoughts on this part?
Yeah, so this is where everyone's going to hate me in the comment section, because I'm not going to stick to the plot of the movie. So, okay. Officer A-Hole and B. Dix. So obviously it's, gag names. So B. Dix, I'm assuming it's Big Dix, and A-Hole is obviously asshole. So one of the people I fired, speaking of ghetto, and a call back to the beginning part, I don't know if I told this story, but when I fired her, it's because she kept sleeping. She slept in a room. I didn't fire her because I didn't have a replacement. But my boss wanted me to fire her because she went in a room. I did the work with her because she was training. After training, I'm like, listen, there's nothing left to do. Instead of me sitting here with you doing nothing for 6 hours, because it's an hour or two of work, and then you just chill out and do what you want, I'm heading home. The minute I left, she went right upstairs and went into a room. I have camera footage on my cell phone. I can look at the cameras, all of the cameras, at any point. I let her know this. I wasn't going to look at the cameras, but someone complained. They came down, no one was there. She was in the room sleeping for basically 6 hours. So I talked to her about this. I'm like, listen, my boss had to fire you, but I'm going to give you another chance because you're good at the actual work. And honestly, I have no one to replace you anyway. I didn't tell her that, but if I fired her, I'd have to be doing the overnight shift. So I spent weeks and weeks trying to find someone. And as I'm doing this, she's still sleeping. But instead of sleeping in the room, she's sleeping in the closets. So I'm like, she's not in the room, but she's not at the desk. I'm looking at the footage. She's not at the desk for hours because she's sleeping in the closet. So when I finally got a replacement, another ghetto person, the person who I said it earlier was going to sue me because she sued her last manager. That's the person I replaced her with. So I finally let her go because I had someone replacement. I got tired of her sleeping everywhere and not doing the work, and guests complaining that they're coming to the front desk and no one's there. So she's like, no, you can't fire me. I set my alarm every hour. I wasn't sleeping. I was just sitting in the closet on my phone, and I had the door cracked so I could see. I'm like, what part of the training did I say it was okay for you to sleep in a closet with the door cracked and set your alarm every hour? And even if that was your claim, you didn't go to the desk every hour. You went to the desk like twice during your shift. Anyway, I let her go, and she starts crank calling the hotel. And she's like, hello, can I get a room at your hotel? Oh, you're booked. Oh, well, who? And these stupid, goofy voices, and everyone knows it's her. So I tell that entire story because of those fake names. She's doing all these crank calls with all these fake names and all this stuff. So that's that the whole fake names thing. There was a callback to for her with those crank calls that she keeps making with the fake names, with the B
Uh-huh.
dicks and the a-holes and all that stuff. So that's why people are gonna hate my reviews because I can't help, that's what I think of when I see that scene. And then the landlord lady is a splitting image of one of my aunts who freaked me out as a kid
Wow.
because she had a mustache, and I'm like, as a kid, it didn't comprehend in my mind. I'm like, why does a woman have a mustache? And every time I see her, like, I only focus on the mustache, and it just freaked me out. I'm like, why does a woman have a mustache? And she wouldn't shave it; she just have it there. It just,
Mhm.
and this woman completely reminded me of that. And then my final thoughts in this section of the film, and I'm still haven't talked about the film yet, but is you mentioned the sexual assault stuff. I was
Yes.
shocked for a comedy how much sexual assault plays into this movie. So, and this was the first but not last mention of or hinting of sexual assault in the movie. So, I'm not sure how much any of that had to do with summation you just made, but all of those thoughts came into my head as I'm watching all this.
Well, you're explaining how this movie is personally connecting with you. This is like
Yes,
really, yeah, this movie's resonating for you.
yes.
Okay. So, as we go forward, Craig and Day Day stop at Bro's Barbecue, which is owned by their dad and uncle. It was Craig's dad who got them and Day Day the security guard jobs at the same strip mall. Uh, and it's Christmas help security. So I guess it's actually not a long term job. Craig warns Day Day that this is just a job and it's nothing like the cop shows he watches on TV. They should be careful, treat people well, don't cause trouble, just collect their money. But Day Day isn't so sure about that. And when they look in the window, they see a Santa Claus counting money inside the restaurant. So they charge in to get him. They beat him until his beard slips off, and they see that it's Uncle Willie, Craig's dad. Uncle Elroy, Day Day's dad, makes mention of something bad happening to the last two security guards at this mall, but Willie stops him from saying anything more. So Craig is now worried. The owner of the mall and Craig and Day Day's new boss, Molly, also owns the donut shop where the cops are eating. He tells Craig and Day Day that they are unarmed security guards and that they don't need fancy gadgets like walkie talkies and flashlights. He gives them a tour of the mall, which includes a new place called Pimps and Hoes. They see a beautiful woman out front and are told her name is Donna. She's the owner's girlfriend. A car pulls up, and a man with a unique fashion sense steps out, and he appears to be Donna's boss. Next, he shows him the liquor store, and he says, "Don't let anybody hang out in front of the liquor store. Nobody." Then he shows them their booth, which is very small, and it's near the entrance to the parking lot. One question: what happened to the last security guards? You ask too many questions. Get to work. Christmas Eve means lots of business. So wait a minute. So it's Christmas Eve, and they've been hired as extra Christmas security. So this job may be even briefer than I realized. Any thoughts on this part?
Yes. So this is going to be the worst review ever. Because Mike Epps, who stars as Day Day, one of the first times I ever saw Mike Epps was in The Sopranos. And it clicked with me because as he's getting out of the car for the Santa Claus, the seatbelt's still on. It reminded me of The Sopranos because when they were going to kill Chris Moltisanti, one of the guys who was going to kill him he tried to run out with his gun, but his seatbelt was still hooked, and I think he ended up shooting himself or something. So it immediately reminded me of The Sopranos, and Mike Epps' appearance in there. And we do get our first glance as well of Katt Williams and
Yes.
the pimp. And I did notice his front teeth were out, and he did tell a story on the podcast that he was holding up his baby, and the baby pulled on the chain, and the chain came down and broke his teeth. And
Yeah.
that's how come he had no front teeth in the movie. And then he was basically homeless because all his money that he was getting for the movie couldn't pay the bills, had to pay for his new teeth. So he's basically sleeping in his trailer, and he had to do this whole movie without his front teeth. So
Yeah.
yeah, it at least one of his stories appeared to be 100% true. So
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Um, so they go inside their booth and hang out. Craig just wants to stay safe and do nothing. Day Day thinks it's boring, and he really seems to buy into the fact that they have a job to do, and he's going to do it. So his first attempt is to stop three older churchwomen from singing Christmas carols in front of the liquor store. And the situation quickly gets ugly as Day Day seems to imply that they are prostitutes. Does he actually believe that, or is it just something he's saying? I don't know. But Craig tries to rein him in, and but he insists that he's going to do this job and he's going to report Craig for insubordination. The next thing he does is he stops a car full of attractive women and tries to get their numbers. And Craig intervenes again. Why is it every time you get a little bit of power, you abuse it? Next, he chases some kids who are playing in front of the toy store. Craig takes them into the alley and insists that he light up a joint to try to calm himself down. And while they share it, Elroy, Day Day's dad, comes out and catches them, and he insists on sharing the joint. He tells them that the thugs don't generally come out until after 1 p.m. But as he speaks, Santa in the mask rises up behind him and points what appears to be a gun in a paper bag at his back. Santa forces all three of them against the wall, and he steals Elroy's Rolex and runs off. They chase him. Day Day blows his whistle like mad, and he bangs on the window where the cops are eating donuts, but they don't respond. He goes in and tells them what happened, and the cops and their boss just laugh at him. Twice in one day, says Officer B. Cox, or was it Officer A. Hole? Elroy and Craig chase Santa until he crosses a busy street and gets away. Elroy makes disparaging remarks about Craig and Day Day's attempt at being security guards. You better turn in your whistles, he says. Any thoughts on this?
yes, another story. So these old women completely remind me of my grandmother, and
Wow.
she eventually died of COVID a couple of years ago.
Mm,
But she was a Jehovah Witness. She basically just sat in the house all day and did nothing but complain. She'd always stress my mother out because she had like a million kids, like all these older generation of Caribbean women always do, just popping out like 12 or 13 kids, just based on the Caribbean culture, I guess. And yeah, she was very hard on my mother, and she stayed with us for a while. And eventually, she got into Jehovah Witness thing. It's just basically it's a cult. Most religions are cults, but that's just a really overt cult where they just get you. The minute they brainwash you, that's it. Your family can't talk to you because they convince you your family is just against you and they're with you, you know? And she would dress
mm,
just like these old ladies. She'd have her Bible in her hand. They'd come in a van and pick her up, drop her on some corner with some other old ladies, and at the end of the day, pick her back up and drop her home. And she spent all day on a corner just like handing out pamphlets. And my grandmother was not a social person. She was not an outwardly person. My grandmother on my mother's side. She was just this quiet lady who would mumble to herself. I'm thinking like, how the hell is she converting anybody? Because that's how she talked. She just
wow.
mumbles, and it's like she always had her head down. She didn't convert anybody. I'm sure it's just a way for her to being accepted, being part of something, feeling wanted. Those type of emotions that they get to you. But seeing these old ladies with the Bibles completely reminded me of that. Um, but as far as like an actual comment on the movie, because at some point I should comment on the movie. This definitely felt like a situation. I don't want to compare it to an actual like really great movie, like Young Frankenstein, but it reminds me of Young Frankenstein in the sense that here's this skeletal plot. Santa Claus is going around stealing presents and money on Christmas instead of giving them away, he's taking it. And here's this Friday thing where it's like, all right, in the framework of Friday, a movie based on one day, Friday is the day that rent is due. and Santa Claus steals your rent money. By the end of the day, you got to get the rent money. So it's a simple setup, a simple premise to get you from A to B. And I think they just got a bunch of funny comedians and they just let them control their own dialogue and do a bunch of skits. And this chunk of the movie felt like a lot of skits. It felt like Mike Epps just ad-libbing. It's like, okay, now I meet these people, now I meet those people, and here's check cashing, here's old ladies, here's this, here's that. And it just felt very skittish. And it just felt like maybe they just did a bunch of skits and just trimmed down the best ones and just threw them out there. Because there wasn't really like a lot of connective tissue. It just felt like random scenes, just boom, 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 boom. Let's just try to get jokes, 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 and introducing a bunch of different comedians in like a short window of time.
Yeah, and basically showing that they're not really doing their job well. You know, they're getting themselves in trouble. Things are not going well for them at this point. Meanwhile, back at Shady Palms, Damon is watching TV while his mother makes her rounds. He seems to be getting turned on watching Tupac. She enters Craig and Day Day's apartment and searches the place. She finds some weed and takes it, and then the dog bites her on the ass. Back at the mall, the cops interview Elroy, and Willie wonders what he was doing back there in the alley. They get into an argument. And although we haven't met him yet, the man with unique fashion sense and an MM hanging around his neck walks and talks with another taller man with a unique fashion sense. And he says, if we build it, the hoes will come. Craig talks to Donna. They seem to like each other, but Day Day jumps in and starts being obnoxious. He tries to get her number. Craig intervenes. And then we see a man and a pregnant woman get off a bus and walk into the Pimps and Hoes while Craig and Day Day are busy arguing. It turns out that the pregnant woman is a shoplifter. She pulls an old basketball out of her belly and starts stuffing clothes into it, while the man distracts Donna and MM by faking a seizure or something like that. Craig and Day Day notice what's going on and successfully stop the two thieves as they try to leave. Finally, they've actually done something right. Any thoughts about this?
Yeah, so I think this is the section where we finally get not Mike Epps, Katt Williams doing dialogue in front of the camera, right? So, it's pretty funny. He's an entertaining character. You know, he's the reason why we're watching it. I thought his presence was good. I just wish it would have came sooner or he had a bigger role, because this was, I guess, his coming out party, the movie that made him a star. It's a pretty small role, at least so far in the movie, to be like a huge coming out party. The other thing that was noticeable is this isn't necessarily a great movie, but it's a functional movie, and there are some funny people in it. I haven't really, there was one part that I laughed out loud for, and it was in this section, and it was the dog. It seemed like the whole setup was she doesn't know there's a dog there because the dog kept hiding from her, and then she steals the weed. And I did kind of laugh out loud when the dog bit her, because I didn't think that was going to be the payoff. I thought the payoff was going to be she saw the dog in the house and tried to kick the dog out because the dog kept hiding. So it kind of caught me off guard. So I thought that was pretty funny because it was a little unexpected. But there's a big low in this movie for me. Like, it's a functional movie. It's decent. Everyone's pretty funny in their roles. It's clear it's just a bunch of comedians, not a bunch of actors. That love interest. She is such a she's beautiful, but she is a god-awful actress. And her scenes with Ice Cube were just so awkward. It was just like kind of cringy. I almost wanted to like look away. It felt like a bad line reading or a bad audition, you know? Like I said, she's pretty, but her scenes were just like, they were just like some of the worst acting. It's like porn star acting, you know? It's like, it was bad. It was bad.
Well, I think it was her first movie as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think she was new to this. Maybe she'd appeared in a couple of things, but I think it might have been her first movie, like it was Katt's first movie. It didn't bother me. She didn't bother me. I thought she was very attractive. Maybe I was just distracted by that. I didn't think, wow, she's terrible. That didn't really occur to me. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
So After Craig and Day Day lock the thieves in their booth, the MM comes across the parking lot with a straight razor. They stop him with minimal fuss, and he introduces himself, finally, as Money Mike. So now we finally got his name. So what you're saying is, yeah, I mean, this is really late in the movie to be even finding out what his name is. He gives Donna shit for not noticing the thieves and then dismisses her. He tries to give Craig and Day Day some money to thank them, but Craig says no charge, just doing their job. And then he invites Mike and Donna to come to their Christmas party later tonight. The angry church ladies come back with a group of young men who look like trouble, and they send them after Craig and Day Day, who run like hell. They sprint past what appears to be the Santa thief emerging from a house with a full sack, but they don't really notice. And they wind up going into the Pimp and Hose store. They ask Money Mike and Donna to hide them, and they do their best. Craig and Day Day get up on the roof and look down at their pursuers below. They see their boss accosted and told, "Remember what we did to the last security guards," and then they punch him. So Craig and Day Day jump off the roof and they remove their uniforms and say, "I'm not going to get my ass kicked over a job." And Molly, their boss, finds them eating lunch in Bro's barbecue, and he fires them. They pretend to be upset, but of course they don't want to do this job anymore. So Elroy then reports Molly to the Board of Health, who chases him out of his donut shop. Craig and Day Day talk about not being in the mood for their Christmas party, but the family kind of gives them a pep talk about not losing their Christmas spirit. Any thoughts on this section?
Yeah, we get a little bit more of Katt Williams the reason we're watching it. Again, I thought he's good in his role. I thought everyone was pretty much, except for the one actress, pretty decent in their role here. And we get kind of like a Benny Hill chase sequence going on. So one thing at this point in the movie is where I kind of noticed it felt like I was watching a basketball game. Because generally when you watch a basketball game, there's no time to breathe. There's just constant music playing nonstop. It's just like, can't I just watch the game? Like, why? I just want to focus on what's going on in the court, but there's just music blaring, boom, 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 boom. And when it's halftime or when it's a timeout, it's like, hey, we're gonna shoot some t-shirts in the audience, and we're gonna do kiss cam, and we're gonna do. It's just like sensory overload, and this movie kind of felt like that. In that, it felt like a 2-hour movie that was just chopped up to just the best parts, and then it was just joke, scene, and there was just like no rest with the music either. If it wasn't the comical music, it was the hip hop music. It was like, all right, this is a funny part. These are the jokes. Here's the comedy music, or here's the hip hop music. It was just like too much. There was no breathing with the movie, and this section is where you really kind of noticed it, at least for me.
Yeah, it is really intense. It's a short movie, and a lot of action goes on in it. A lot of characters. So yeah, it does feel.
And
very...
it seemed like maybe I was wrong, but didn't it seem like there was music in every scene? If it wasn't the hip hop music, it was like comedy music.
Yeah, there was a lot of music for sure, and I felt some of it I could kind of recognize. They were maybe invoking some older pieces of music, the way that soundtracks sometimes do, where they're trying to maybe reference something. But there was also just a lot of songs that were included as well, not the score itself, but songs.
I generally do that in my movies because, like I mentioned before in the previous section that we talked about, it's hard to get good audio when you're shooting guerrilla. So I have a lot of music in my movies to cover up the people yelling in the background or the poor audio recordings. But yeah, you figure they wouldn't have this issue, but I guess they wanted. It's just kind of like that heart, keep people engaged, keep them engaged, keep them engaged.
Yeah.
So
it's anti-boredom, just, keep hammering people.
Well, short attention span mainly, I think, more than anti-boredom, but who knows?
Yeah, well, could be. So the narrator basically says that Craig and Day Day decide to have a rent party, and the place is packed. We see Craig ask one guy named Pinky for a donation at the door. But he offers 3 women instead of cash, so it's not clear to me how the fundraiser is going. Damon is there looking uncomfortable, and he actually says, I don't want to dance with none of these hoes, which again, I think they're continuing the jailhouse kind of humor here. Donna and Mike arrive, and Damon thinks that Money Mike looks magically delicious. Craig introduces them, and Magic Mike goes to the bathroom, and Damon follows. Craig says, where you going? Damon says, fresh fish on the line. There ain't nothing like that. In the bathroom, we see Mike standing over the toilet with no pants on. And Damon comes in and rips his shirt open, and he's got a phone book taped to his belly. I guess it's makeshift armor, I suppose. He takes it off and he moves toward Mike, who screams. So I guess this is where we're kind of getting into the sexual assault that Katt talked about in the podcast, where there was a sexual assault in the movie that he kind of argued against. So I was kind of surprised because it seems to be, really happening here, and there's just a lot of that whole prison sexual assault humor sort of continuing on through this section. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I could see where it's implied that they did have sex, because why was his pants down when he was peeing in the first place, And
Yeah.
what they kept emphasizing that they were in there so long, but then when we finally cut to what's in the bathroom, it's like it kind of implied that nothing was happening. Like
Yes.
when we cut in, it's like that's when things started happening. So the editing of it is kind of weird. So I can see where Katt is coming from, in that I can see if you edit this a certain way, it kind of implies that they did have sex. So I think he was probably right in this, because maybe they just tweaked it a little bit to imply that he didn't. But the way they were so flippant about the sexual humor, I could easily see them saying that they had sex, because that's the direction this movie's going. And I don't know why a comedy like this would lean so heavy into the sexual assault stuff.
Yeah.
And then you also have the scene with him and the girl. Again, I found it cringe, because as beautiful as she is, the acting is just fucking awful. But that didn't fit the tone either, because like usually in a movie like this, the tone you think they're going for is like at most a kiss. But he kind of implied that they were gonna like have sex right away. And it's like that didn't really fit the tone of the movie. It's like usually the heroic character isn't gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna slap these skins. That's usually the sidekick. And the hero's like, let me get to know you type thing,
Yeah.
So it's the sexual elements of this movie just felt a little off. Not like I'm offended. I don't care, but it just didn't suit the tone of the movie. It just felt weird.
Yeah, I agree. It was weird. It seems like he was trying to seduce her, but then Day Day bursts in and kind of kills the moment, if there really was a moment, because it didn't really strike me that would happen, like you're saying. It doesn't seem.
But then her line was like, get a lock on the door next time. It kind of it seemed like she was down to have sex.
Yeah, maybe. And yeah, you're right. They're in there a long time, and Craig's dad needs the bathroom badly. And so Craig says, well, why don't you go down and use the landlady's bathroom? And so he does, and she's really excited to let him in. And it's at that point where Money Mike is woken up by water being dumped on his face, and it appears that nothing's really happened, which just doesn't make sense, because they've been in there for so long. Like, he fainted, and then this guy just stood there for 10 minutes while he's unconscious, and then finally woke him up. It's weird. It's a weird moment. And then, of course, he tries to sort of seal the deal, I guess actually assault him at this point. But Mike turns the tables by grabbing a vice grip from behind the toilet and using it to crush Damon's balls, I guess, is the impression here. So I guess if maybe the assault didn't quite happen, I guess, is what they're kind of saying. And so meanwhile, Craig's mom finds out that her husband has gone downstairs to the landlady. So she marches down and Craig follows. And downstairs, Willie comes out of the bathroom to find the landlady lounging on the couch in lingerie. And she wants Willie to pay his son's rent by having sex with her. He doesn't agree, but she pulls him on top of her, and that's when his wife and Craig burst in and catch them, and all hell breaks loose. And upstairs, Mike leads Damon outside by the balls, and he asks Craig to hold the vice grip while he gets into his car with Donna. They argue about it, and it's kind of confusing to me, but in the end, Donna takes off in the car, and I guess they let go of the vice grip at the wrong moment or something, and Damon is now free, and he chases Mike down the street. And it's at that point that Craig and Day see the Santa thief. Any thoughts on all of this chaos?
Yeah, like I said, I think we're both on the same page where the editing of the whole bathroom scene really implied that it probably was rape in the first, at least the first draft, you know, because the timing of the scene makes no sense. Again, the sexual assault stuff. It's not just the bathroom scene, but then with the landlady. And then even when they're dancing on the dance floor with Ice Cube's uncle, Mike Epps, Day-Day's father, the father's girlfriend has her ass grabbed by the pimp. It's like, why are you grabbing? You came with 3 women. Why are you sexually assaulting another woman? You had 3 other women that you came with. I just don't get, like, that whole section is like so much of sexual assault going on. Like,
it is,
weird. Yeah. And this is the other time in the movie that I did laugh out loud, is the timing of letting go of the vice grip, where she just pulled. I didn't. Again, just like the dog bite, I didn't expect it. I thought like he, you know, because she didn't give any indication to her character. Like they could have. I could see why they didn't do anything with her character. She's a terrible actress. But like even in the scene with the bed, instead of implying they were going to have sex, it could have been him getting to know her and finding out like, why is she with a pimp? She's not dressed like a hoe. It could be like, hey, like, you know, well, you know, I came here and he took care of me, and you know, even though he acts like this, he's really sweet. He's more like a brother, or something to develop her character. And then something to maybe say why she drove off could have been developed, instead of like, you know, oh, they almost had sex in the bed. They could have like done a little bit of something to build up to her saying, I've had enough, I'm going to drive off. But it was funny though, because like the timing, him and Ice Cube were timing this thing out, and she's just like, I'm out. You know, so that was pretty funny.
Yeah. So Craig and Day chase the Santa thief, who goes into a rundown looking house, and inside the Santa takes off his mask and he plugs in a Christmas tree and he looks at his pile of treasure. Craig and Day go in and attack Santa, and he manages to get away, and they chase him. But I have to ask, why do they chase him? Because they should be looking for their stuff, you know, their rent money. It could be here. All this stuff is in here, but they chase him. Yeah, but I guess the answer is then we wouldn't have this big chase scene. And it is quite an amazing, epic chase through yards and homes. It involves shotgun blasts and beatings with pool cues. Santa is tossed out of a second-story window and then hit by a limousine, which sends him sailing through the air and onto the pavement. It's Pinky's limo, and he's mad at the driver for doing this again and costing him money, so they take off. Craig and Day stand over top of this badly injured Santa and say, "You got knocked the fuck out." And then next time we see them, they're wheeling a shopping cart full of stuff down the street and saying, "I'm glad we got our rent back." And we pan up to the roof of the house, and we see Santa is tied up and sitting in the Christmas sleigh decoration on the roof. And they say, waiting for the police to find him. And he says, "For all I know, he's still there." Now, this guy's probably dying from his injuries. He just got run over in a serious way. I mean, this seems a little crazy, but oh, whatever. And so, just like in The French Connection, we get snippets of what happened to all the main characters. And the final one is about Craig convincing Donna to come back to the party and into his room. And this time he blocks the door with a dresser, calling back her comment earlier. And, you know, this all just feels a bit like a wishful fantasy to me. Like, I just don't really buy this, but, well, I guess it's a Christmas miracle. So there we are. It's the end of the movie. Any thoughts on this?
We've got like 5 seconds left.
All
I'll
right.
talk to you on the other side. We'll wrap up in a couple minutes. Sorry about that.
Okay.
All
No
right.
problem. No problem. Hello again, Sean.
Angus. So this ending sequence is kind of odd because they really go with the slapstick here. It's just it's turned into a cartoon basically with the violence. But there were a couple of moments that again made me laugh out loud. So when the Santa Claus tried to jump out the window,
Mm.
and typically everything breaks, and he just bumped his head and fell right back in. I thought
Yes.
that was perfect. I thought he should have
Yeah.
just got knocked out there, and when he wakes up, the cops there have him, and then you
Yeah.
have more like a talky ending rather than the action sequence. Because I thought that was hilarious, but it kind of lost its bite when he just gets right back up like a second later. But I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty funny, and I thought with the tone of everything going on with the chase scene that the first time he crossed the street, I'm like, oh, he's gonna get hit by a car. Then he
Yeah.
didn't. Then he crossed the street again. Then he got hit by the limousine, and then he was rolling on top of the limousine. I thought that was pretty funny too, because
Yeah.
they could have just did a quick shot of him getting hit, but the fact that he was rolling over it, I thought was a nice shot. It was a little clever. Um, but I wasn't a big fan of the slapstick ending, and especially I think from late in the party where all the sex stuff happened up until this scene, this chase scene, there was a lot of sped up footage that looked really cheap.
Mm.
It's just like it looks like sped up footage. You're not fooling anyone. Like obviously you do that when the action scene doesn't look authentic, so you speed up the footage a little bit. But it just made the movie feel a little cheap. It felt like something you watch on TV instead of like a motion picture, watching the sped up footage. But you're right. It didn't feel like reality as well. Then he goes back and he bangs the girl. Eh, it's like, is that really the tone you should be? It feels like a family movie to a certain level, you know? It's like,
Yeah.
you figure you'd want to get to know the girl. Like,
Yeah.
as bad of an actor as she is, if maybe we knew something about her, the only thing she is the object of his desire, and she's pretty. That's it. We know
Mm.
absolutely nothing about her. Getting to know her as a character at least would have helped, to make the movie a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall, I mean, it's short, it's fast paced. You can't like doze off for a second because there's constant music and action and jokes. And so, I mean, it's not a bad watch. It's nothing great, which we didn't expect, but it's not the worst movie we've seen on the podcast. That
No.
that's reserved for my brother's wife. Um, and I can see why
Yeah.
people like it because even though I don't relate to this culture, I did grow up black in like a lower class family. So I did see a lot of these things going on. And that's why I was able to tell stories where I related to what was happening. So I can see like a certain culture, loving a movie like this.
Yeah. Well, I think it is.
Black comedies, there's so many black comedians in here as well. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think it is funny. Like, it did make me laugh out loud several times, and it's entertaining. Like you say, it's short. It's never really boring. Um, I gather that the first two movies are probably better. Like a lot of sequels, I think it's diminishing returns. So this is probably not the best of the three, but it was entertaining enough. I didn't mind at all sitting through it. I actually enjoyed it for the most part. And it's interesting you say the thing about the cartoonish at the end, because that might be the only explanation for why you would tie a guy up to the roof who's just been run over by a car. I mean, this guy's probably lucky to be alive at this point. He could well be dying, and you're going to be, accessories now for tying him up there instead of taking him to the hospital. It just doesn't really make sense to me. But if it's a cartoon, then I guess he's Wile E. Coyote or something, and he's just fine. He's not really seriously injured. But I also agree that it would have been better to just leave the girl and him as, it's a possible romance. It's not really happening. in this moment, but it's just like it's like a bit of hope, like she goes home and it's like, yeah, well, maybe call me sometime or whatever. The idea that he would call her and she would come back to the party just seems kind of absurd to me. I don't really see that happening, but I guess it was meant to be, as I said, some kind
And
of Christmas.
you got to look
party.
at in the context of the movie, like of the story. They had like one conversation, you know.
Mhm.
They try to make
Yeah.
her out to be this sweet girl, but if she's gonna bang him off of one conversation, she is a hoe, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that seems to be the implication that, Mike is a pimp and she's a hoe. But is it true or not? They don't really deal with that. They don't really tell us for sure. But yeah, it is weird that we don't find out more. We don't, you expect
More,
to
we don't find
out.
out anything about
Well,
her
true.
character.
Yeah, yeah.
What's one
ca-
thing we really know about her that's,
Yeah, nothing really. And they seem to like each other. Like every time they talk or look at each other, there's something there, but it's not enough for me to.
it's like she likes him because he's the lead character.
Yeah,
What does she like about him,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's superficial. It's not really a believable moment at the end.
No, no,
Yeah.
no, not at all. And you know what is funny? You may think this is a stretch, but you know what it kind of reminded me of when he got hit by the car and he rolled over the car and all this stuff was happening to him at the end? Deep Red,
Oh
where
wow.
it's like they're chasing the serial killer and you figure
Yes.
like they're gonna kill the serial killer or catch him, but they have nothing to do with catching the serial killer. The serial killer runs in the streets and gets run over by a truck, and that's how he dies.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of like this. They never catch him. He just ends up
Yeah.
getting run over and, cartoonishly hurt.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. And like I said, why even bother? Because you've got the stuff. Like that's what you really care about is getting your rent money. So search the room. Don't chase after him. And then if that's where he lives, you can probably call the cops and they'll come and they'll be able to figure out who he is and arrest him. You don't have to chase him down. Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me. But I guess they wanted that cartoonish action sequence, which was pretty entertaining. But
yeah.
you
I don't know. I thought it would have been funny if it ended when he just ran into the window and just got knocked out. And then,
Yeah.
maybe then the girl could have came back because maybe some of her stuff got stolen too. And then she'd be like, "Oh my God, you're such a hero. How'd you do it?" Well, he could be like, "Well, like I knocked him out and I did this." And, we'll know the truth. And maybe something like that. I don't know. But,
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard to complain because it's not really aiming to be anything major. It's obviously a
Mhm.
low budget film. And like I said, I mean, they gave a bunch of comedians a vehicle to show their comedy. And clearly it worked for Cat Williams because he went on to do bigger things. And, it gave a lot of comedians opportunities. They had their little own sections, their own monologues, their own opportunity to get a little bit of spotlight. And there were a lot of comedians in there. You could tell based on how the scenes played out, like, yeah, there's a lot of professional comedians in this film. So,
Yeah.
so for what it was aiming to do, I think it achieved that. And I think it was worth a watch. Is it something I'm going to revisit? Probably not. But if I was with someone that really wanted to see it, it wouldn't kill me to watch it because it's
Mhm.
short and it's laugh out loud funny a few times, and it's kind of funny for most of the movie as well.
Yeah. And it is a Christmas movie in its own way. So for people who like to watch Christmas themed movies every year, this isn't a bad one, if you want to just enjoy the Christmas atmosphere. And I think it does do a better job than a lot of films at that Christmas atmosphere. It's really, Christmas is a part of the story and it's there, it's definitely, it's not just superficial. It is really a Christmas story in a way.